All right, welcome to the Responsive Workplace, creating a workplace that works. My name is Ari Kepnes. I'm the Director of Market Research here at Density, and I'm joined by Matt Harris, and he is over at Envoy. So, Matt, you want to say hi?
Hey, good morning. Good to be here.
And we'll be talking about this idea of the responsive workplace and how that theme ties into three parts of the workplace: building systems, spaces themselves, and the services therein. Then we will take your questions. So this will be about a 20-minute or so presentation. And then please make sure to have some questions for us. You can see at the top of your, or the bottom of your screen, a Q&A folder. It looks like a little Q icon. And if you press that, you can submit your questions either anonymously or not, and we will be sure to answer them. And after this webinar is complete, we will be also sending an email with the recording. So thank you so much for taking the time, and we will get started here. So I work at a company called Density, and some background about Density. We were founded by a team that had experience both from NASA, Genentech, Microsoft, Apple, Stanford. We came together to try to really understand, how do we think about real estate and physical space in terms of performance? How do we drive results and actually know how a space is performing? Today we have over 100 plus million square feet of corporate and commercial real estate customers, and we will talk a little about us towards the end as well as we tie in everything. But just at a high level, we build a device that counts how many people are using every room, building, or floor in a building, so that we can determine how it's being used and optimize the space based on the people who need it and their needs for use. So I am joined, as I said, by Matt Harris. And Matt, do you want to say hi to everyone and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Matt Harris. I'm the head of workplace technology over at Envoy. And Envoy is a San Francisco-based startup working on workplace technology tools and services. And I've been there for just over 2 years. Started out as a software engineer there and helped to manage the engineering team. And then moved into this role thinking about what technology we put into our own workplace and identifying what the right tools are for both our employees at Envoy and then learning from our customers and our partners about what technology really makes a great workplace. Envoy is a system that maybe a lot of people know from our front desk visitor management product. If you've ever signed in with an iPad when you walk into an office, take your picture and get a badge, that's probably Envoy. And we sign in about 100,000, actually now it's about 115,000 visitors a day worldwide. And we have customers across the world from Slack and Pinterest and Mazda and Volvo, whole variety of customers using Envoy. And so as we've learned from those customers about what works best for their front desk, we started expanding beyond the front desk and into meeting rooms and package rooms and room booking. So we're pretty excited about that. Excited to be able to share some of the things we've learned here.
Very cool. And Matt, what I've learned personally from you too is seeing your involvement on the engineering side and kind of working in a technical role at Envoy. It's been really cool to see how you're now, as someone who's managing Envoy's own workplace, taking some of those principles and really having almost like the same principles that you would have towards any product development. It's been really cool to see how you guys have that approach. And that kind of is where we got started, because when I went out and saw Envoy's own workplace, and I was really kind of impressed by how you were thinking about iterating and thinking about responding to different needs. And this was a conversation that we had, and you had said to me, there's a need to be able to be responsive to employees in the moment. And that really stuck with me. And that's why we're here today, to share that message more broadly. But what did you mean by that in our conversation?
Sure. Well, the concept of the responsive workplace really stemmed from seeing these big trends shifting in the workplace. We know that workplaces are changing quite a lot, and we know that people are starting to work from home more often. They're starting to work from co-working spaces, work remotely more often. happen. But then in the physical workspace, we know that things are changing in terms of what people want for work environments. Some people want different work environments throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. We know that people who are working in teams like to work maybe in different ways depending on the type of work that they're doing. So we found that we really need to have this ability to adjust to the needs and the preferences of a wide range of workers. And then coupled with that, we've seen the rise of the smart home. And so a lot of us have smart home technology in our own residences, and we've seen that over time, as we become more and more attuned to the benefits that brings to us in our home, employees are coming into work and saying, why can't I have that in the workplace as well? And so we started at Envoy thinking about what is this idea of a workplace that really works well for employees, and this concept of responsiveness is really critical from both an employee productivity perspective, also an employee happiness perspective. And so we think that by being responsive to that experience, we can be better in the workplace.
Cool. So, some of the themes that we touched on here, I'm going to kind of unpack. When we think about the responsive workplace, it's rooted in this idea that we want to understand employees' needs, right? And then be able to respond to them, which means, right, and as these expectations change, we want to be able to align the workplace with those patterns. And so the way that this kind of manifests itself when we think about a workplace is really three levers that you can pull. And this is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. There's the building systems themselves, which is everything from, let's say, like an Envoy technology or a meeting room technology that Envoy is getting into, or everything like video conferencing, control, HVAC. That is really there in terms of being able to understand how a building can operate on a system level. And then we move up towards kind of the space allocation. So we have systems and the spaces themselves. So how are the spaces actually optimized for the people that use them? And the last tier there is the services and amenities. So when you're thinking about having a best-in-class workplace or responsive workplace, there's these three levers that you can pull, right? The building systems themselves, the space allocations and the things or the features of the spaces themselves, and then the services and amenities. So today we're going to walk through this framework, and I'd love to just learn how Envoy thinks about some of the challenges in each of these, and then also kind of how we were thinking about using density as we go through some of these. It might be helpful. So let's begin here with this problem here that we have on the office level of the entrances that relates to building security and building systems. So what was a problem that you were having and thinking through at Envoy?
Sure. One of the things that really was a big challenge for us was thinking about the employee experience in an office where there are no set schedules and everyone is working as dynamically as possible. And commonly, the way we operate offices is based on time, right? It's based on schedule. And we set a schedule. We're open from 9 to 5. We're open Monday through Friday. But it turns out that people don't work that way. And we're trying to move away from schedules. The challenge with schedules, I think there's three big problems with schedule-based kind of office operations, is that one, they don't adapt to the things that come down the pike. So that could be events that happen in the evening, or for whatever reason, people needing to arrive early or stay late. They're error prone because we find that on holidays or days when the office should be locked, there's now a critical failure point if someone forgets to change a schedule. And then there's this sense of uncertain urgency that, especially as a workplace leader, it's very difficult to know when my workplace needs to be essentially on for my employees. I don't know what my business hours are anymore. And so when employees are coming to the building, we want to make sure that they can get into the building at any time of the day and be able to do their best work.
So what was some of the way that you approached this problem so that you could both respond to their needs and kind of allow them to have the flexibility that they need?
Sure. So what we implemented is Density's occupancy system. and we put density sensors on all of our entrance and egress doors in our space. And that allows us at any moment to know exactly how many people are in that space. And with that, we can start to trigger all sorts of actions. We can, first of all, know when our workplace is being used. And in fact, I think we'll show later, I get a notice, a little alert on my phone every morning when the first 5 people have shown up. So I know, okay, now the office business hours are on. And I know at the end of the day when the last person leaves, so I know that the office is now closed up. And that changes every single day. But we get a real-time people count. We look at all those doors together as one singular space, so that we can know overall what the picture looks like at any moment. And then we have data that we can look historically to see how that space has been used.
Great. So I think kind of what I've also learned in terms of what we're talking about is something that's real time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like this entrance lockout problem, or thinking about the building systems, talking to each other, having a real time. But there's other things that are a little bit more strategic and take a lot more time. One of them is this idea now that we're moving up kind of the chain of thinking about those levers that I mentioned of space allocation, right? And here there's kind of these really strategic questions that traditionally, there hasn't been a way to get data on. And tell me a little about some of those challenges and how you think about those questions here.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at space allocation and space usage in 2 ways, both the short term and the long term. And so I think you're hitting it right on the head that by bringing data into the picture, we can actually make both short term and long term decisions way better. A couple of the ways that we've used occupancy data for making better long term decisions are one, just last week we had our all hands week. So all of our remote employees came into town, and we've been doing this a couple of times, and we have data from the last couple of all hands weeks when our remote employees came into town, and we have a similar sort of schedule. And we were able to look back at the data and say, okay, how do we think people are going to behave during this upcoming week? So as we were planning, we were able to look at that and predict food usage, activity participation, when do we need things staffed and ready, that sort of thing. That was really big from the kind of cyclical, these long-term ongoing events. Thinking about some of the more traditional facilities usage, we also are looking at our expanding into another space downstairs. We're going to outfit it very similarly to how our 4th floor is set up. And we're already looking at the data to see how our conference rooms used, how many conference rooms do we need for the number of employees that we're going to have in that space. We look at density data to understand when those spaces are used, and to understand what type of furniture to put in those spaces. We've already in the past been able to adapt our furniture in some of the meeting rooms that we have in our space based on the understanding of meeting room size. We found with our occupancy data in meeting rooms that a lot of meetings are one-on-one. They're using it for, like a manager and an IC maybe having a weekly meeting. It turns out that in that type of environment, soft seating is a much more comfortable environment to have that type of comfortable conversation. You don't need a screen and you don't need a typical conference room table. So we actually switched out a number of our meeting rooms. Instead of being standard conference room table, we switched to soft seating in order to accommodate that need.
Yeah, I really like what I'm hearing in your perspective here is that there's really an understanding of a workplace that has to support disparate needs and an understanding first of those needs, right? So whether it's a one-on-one meeting and that warrants different types of furniture and outfitting, or even just a whole new floor, or, because I know you guys are expanding, and congrats, that's such an exciting thing.
Thank you.
As you guys are expanding to this rocket ship, it's like you need more space and you're consuming it in different ways. So there seems to be a really cool way that you're using data to kind of allocate space accordingly. And I think meeting rooms are a really hot topic today. I think I'll just say we actually just got featured in Work Design on workdesign.com. They're doing a whole piece based on some research that we did around how meeting rooms are used. And one of the findings that we saw, Matt, across a lot of our clients was meeting rooms are actually being used almost a third of the time just by one person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in lieu of the lack of private offices and open office plans. We're finding that people are still trying to meet that need for a private space for a video call or to get heads down work done in meeting rooms. So like those are the types of insights that you can surface. And it's cool that you guys are kind of, I would say, definitely ahead of the game in terms of understanding how do we actually outfit our spaces accordingly.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really interesting and that I've learned recently is that that data actually changes over time. I think that as we're growing, we're finding that as we're growing different teams, maybe at different speeds, we're needing different types of spaces. And we're using that data. That data is teaching us different things. What's kind of surprising to me is that I guess I would have expected that data kind of stayed consistent. So you could do maybe like a point in time sort of measure and say, okay, this is sort of how Envoy uses workspaces. It turns out that actually that's not the case. And for example, we've grown our sales team quite extensively. And so we have a lot more people who are needing to make sales calls and do sales demos, that sort of thing. If I was doing just a point in time sort of measure of this, instead of having regular data collected, I wouldn't be able to see that change that's happening and be able to continue to be responsive over time.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point here. Around responsive means that you're constantly responding, which means you need new input on how you need to respond in different ways as you evolve. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. And then I think just at a high level here, we've gone through kind of some of the building systems and how those need to talk about specifically around entrances and security. We've talked now about meeting room allocation and space allocation more broadly with you guys expanding and kind of supporting that growth. And then there's this final tier here around services and amenities. So some of the questions here are around how many people actually come in on a given day and how do I adjust some of my services and amenities, whether it's cleaning, whether it's dining and food. And so that seems like something too that you guys are thinking about as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think food and beverage is an obvious place where that comes to play. We more recently actually just made an adjustment to our weekly meeting schedule as a company as well, thinking about some company culture events. And so we typically would have a weekly meeting on Friday afternoons. And we looked at the density data that we see of occupancy, and we said, we don't have a lot of employees in the office at this moment, but we're spending a lot on food and beverages for this particular event. When would be a better time to host this? And we looked at the density data and we said, well, here's our peak occupancy. It's actually Thursday afternoons at 3:00. So we said, well, let's move the event there. So starting this week, we now have that event starting at Thursday at 3:00, and we'll be able to keep looking at that data, but it's allowing us in theory to save some good money, make a better experience for the employee each week because we have more engagement and activity. And at the end of the day, we provide the right services for those employees.
Very cool. And I think, like I said at the beginning of this, that I see you as this like workplace leader and adapting kind of to the world of workplace using some of the principles of product design or engineering more largely. And the idea that you'd be open to that type of feedback and you would be kind of really looking at almost from a scientific perspective. Hey, what about if we move this over? Or what about if we actually could predict the right amount of food and when, and how to think about these team building or these psychosocial events of belongingness in a workplace that everyone's trying to get right, and how to use data to do that.
Yeah. Engineers love iteration, right? And I love iteration. It allows us to quickly improve continuously. And so I think when you start talking about aligning services to needs and some of this thinking, you can be really tempted to want to invest a huge amount of time and thinking into let's do a big analysis, right, of all the things that are happening in our office, and then let's make some big changes. But what we find is that actually what you need to do is exactly what you're saying, is just tweak and iterate here and there, and over time we end up seeing a far better responsive space. And so making little shifts to schedule, making little shifts to the way that our systems integrate with some of these occupancy systems allows us to be more responsive. And I like bringing that engineering perspective into it, we're a pretty engineering culture heavy company. So it works really well for us. I mean, not work super well for every company, but I think that what we find is that all employees actually really like that, because the cycle and the amount of time for feedback is much, much smaller. And we can learn faster. Sometimes we're not going to make the right adjustment, and that allows us to pull that back in those moments that we do.
Yeah. Well, I think, Matt, I think the idea of at a workplace company managing workplace technology has to be a big feat. So it sounds like you figured something out to make it work. So that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
And so in just our final couple minutes here before we take your questions, we're going to get a little bit more in the weeds about how we actually collect some of this data and some of the ways that we think about in practice making this type of thing work. So density, the solution that we've talked about throughout, some of enabling this is, in my mind, the underlying layer that allows a lot of our clients to be able to respond to each of these disparate needs in each of these disparate systems that they have. So whether it's the building system with HVAC, with heating and cooling based on how many people are in the building, or access control that actually can control tailgating events. So when someone badges in but two people come in, detecting that, or meeting room data and kind of syncing in with that, from larger strategic decisions around space allocation, knowing how our space is actually used, to services and amenities, especially when people aren't coming into the office every day. And so occupancy and utilization data in real time can support all of these different things. It's not just about a historical lens, but it's really, we're seeing our clients like Matt, who are trying to push the envelope forward of what workplace needs to do, utilize data in that way. And so the way that we approach that is we have dashboards that people can visit, that you can see some of the trend and analysis data, or hourly breakdowns of how different spaces are used, as well as mobile applications and real-time alerts. And we're seeing more and more of that. I actually just came back from flying out of talking to Marriott, and they're actually doing for their own hotels similar stuff that you're thinking about, of knowing at what time and how many people are in different parts, whether they're lounges or their gyms, and then cleaning them or servicing based on some of those occupancy needs. And so I think one thing to just keep in mind here is when we talk about occupancy or utilization, it's not a new thing. I mean, people have talked about the idea of counting people, for a while, but the challenge is that accurately counting people without invading their privacy, meaning not being a camera solution, is really a challenging thing, and something that we've spent a lot of time at Density working on over the past 5 years of building out a system that can have real-time accurate count on a room and floor and building level. And as you can see here, there's a lot of complexity that goes into that. And the other thing that's happening now is that everyone's talking about things like IoT and computer vision, and it's getting very confusing. And so our approach to that is to just say that you need an understanding of how many people are in these spaces to make the best workplace possible. And we want to do that in a way that can be scaled across the organization. So these are the units that we have produced, both the hardware, I've mentioned the software. Here's the hardware that gets put above a doorway or a threshold. And as people enter and exit, it is being able to track that without tracking them personally and identifiable information. So that's our approach. And I think in practice, there's a lot that it unlocks, and it's been helpful to kind of hear how Matt is one of the best in class workplace technologists out there, and how he's pushing the envelope forward with some of this technology. So thank you very much. We're going to take a couple questions, and let's see here, and then we will wrap this up. So the first question I see here is, of the three pillars that you mentioned, services, building systems, and space allocation, which do you get the most pressure on internally to kind of innovate on, or where do you feel like employees come to you and want more from? Where would you say that?
Interesting. I mean, I think that the challenge is really finding a blend of the three. but I think it's easiest for people to talk and ask about the systems, the building systems. They're more tangible in some ways, and it also ties to things like security. Security is really obviously an important topic for most workplaces, and even for us is taken a more of a front seat more recently as we're expanding out onto the first floor of our space and thinking about what does that mean for us in terms of risk and all that. And so I think that's probably where the most pressure comes, is to implement these integrations and the systems that we think are going to kind of be the tools in the toolbox to allow you to do those other things. The truth is that if you don't have those systems in place, you can't really start digging in deep into the employee experience, into those services and amenities in some way. So you start there with that foundation and then iterate on top of that.
Cool. And then there's a question here that says, have you found that it looks like here, have you found that cameras are not viable for utilization data? Why not? Maybe you want to, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, we looked at camera tech, and there are a number of privacy challenges that come into play there. And at the end of the day, we found that a passive non-PII or non-personally identifiable information system like density was a far better solution for us. It removes any of that risk around revealing personal information, and it was actually a far easier installation. It turns out that most of the camera-based systems that are out there are actually kind of older tech, were harder to implement and harder to install.
Very cool. All right, so I guess that just about wraps us up here. I want to just thank everyone for taking the time to sit with us, or I guess you weren't sitting, I don't know where you were, anywhere in the mobile workforce, but listen to us, and we will be sending along this webinar. And please reach out to either myself or Matt. Our emails are right here. And we would love to continue the conversation, see how we can be helpful as you manage a new world of responsive workplace. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.